The final 24 hours of Troy Davis. Did Georgia execute an innocent man? Hi everyone. It was a night the world wouldn't forget. On September 21st, 2011, inside the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison, Troy Anthony Davis lay awake on death watch. Every hour, a guard opened the slot to his cell, jolting him back from restless sleep. The ticking clock wasn't just counting down minutes, it was measuring the weight of doubt, outrage, and a nation divided. Davis, convicted of killing an off-duty police officer in 1989, had spent over 2 decades maintaining his innocence. By the time his final day arrived, his name had become a symbol of injustice to some, of accountability to others. With thousands protesting outside and world leaders pleading for mercy, Davis's execution became one of the most controversial in U.S. history. But inside that cold cell, Troy Davis wasn't a headline. He was a man waiting. And what happened next would leave a mark on America's conscience forever. Dear friends, the final day of Troy Anthony Davis's life began the way it had for so many others, on death watch under relentless surveillance and tension. From the moment he awoke on September 21st, 2011, his world was narrowed to a 6-by-9-foot cell inside Georgia's Diagnostic and Classification Prison. Every 60 minutes, guards opened the slot on his door to make sure he hadn't harmed himself. These check-ins weren't for his comfort. They were routine steps in the final hours of a condemned man's life. For Troy Davis, it was the last chapter in a 2-decade legal battle that had drawn global attention, questions of justice, and accusations of grave error. 14 days before, Davis had received the official execution order, one sheet of paper that would redefine his fate. It listed his name, the scheduled date, and the time he would die. A day later, he was asked to submit a request for his last meal. In large block letters, Davis scrawled a bold refusal: none. I will be fasting. He wasn't staging a protest against hunger. He was making a statement, a final act of defiance. He still maintained his innocence. By 7:50 in the morning, Davis finally moved from his bunk. He went through the motions: a strip search, a monitored shower, and a brief meeting with the prison warden. Nothing about the process hinted at mercy. At 9 o'clock in the morning, his final visits began. Over the course of 6 hours, Davis was allowed to see 28 people, family members, childhood friends, legal advocates, and spiritual supporters. Among them was his sister, Martina Correa, who had devoted years of her life campaigning for his exoneration. Frail and in a wheelchair, she was accompanied by her son. Her presence in that visitation room was both heartbreaking and powerful, a symbol of unwavering love. For Davis, these meetings were emotionally taxing, but he met each visitor with calmness. There were no tears from him, just quiet words of encouragement and gratitude. When his young niece rushed into the room, giggling as she hugged him, it was a moment that stripped away the prison walls and the looming execution. He wasn't inmate 67378. He was simply Uncle Troy. But even as the room was filled with warmth, outside those walls, the machinery of the state continued to move forward. Davis's supporters were scrambling. Jay Art, one of his closest advocates, worked the prison's payphone, calling anyone who could possibly intervene. He made a final round of appeals to the United States Supreme Court. Martina, exhausted, asked him if there was still hope. He answered honestly, "We're still fighting, but we have to be realistic." At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, visitation hours ended. Troy Davis returned to his cell, alone once more. Though phone calls were still permitted, they were limited to his legal team. From that point forward, his family could only send messages through intermediaries. The emotional isolation began to take root. That evening, a dinner tray was slid through the door. Davis refused it. Instead, he asked only for a grape beverage, but as the hours wore on and his fate remained uncertain, hunger returned. Later that night, he quietly requested a meal, his first food all day. It was nothing special: a cheeseburger, potatoes, slaw, beans, cookies. The same meal served to every inmate that evening. But even that small act eating was steeped in the awareness that it might be his final taste of life. Outside the prison, hundreds of supporters had gathered in Vigil. Their signs bore messages like "I am Troy Davis" and "Too much doubt." Chants, prayers, and gospel songs filled the Georgia night. From Paris to London, Washington D.C. to San Francisco, thousands stood in solidarity. Leaders like Pope Benedict XVI, former President Jimmy Carter, and even former FBI agents publicly questioned the reliability of Davis's conviction. The case had crumbled over the years. 7 of the 9 key eyewitnesses had recanted or altered their testimony. No physical evidence had ever conclusively tied Davis to the scene. Still, Georgia's Board of Pardons and the United States Supreme Court had refused to stop the execution. At 7 o'clock in the evening, when Davis was scheduled to die, the unexpected happened. Nothing. The guards didn't come for him. The warden didn't appear. The door remained closed. For a moment, hope flickered. Outside, the crowd erupted in cheers. They sang, "We shall overcome." They believed a miracle was unfolding, but the delay was procedural. Davis's attorneys had submitted a final appeal to the United States Supreme Court, arguing that false testimony and witness coercion had corrupted the original trial. While the court reviewed the request, the execution was temporarily put on hold. Inside his cell, Davis waited, alone. Around 10 o'clock at night, his lawyer called with an update. The Supreme Court had denied the appeal. There would be no stay, no miracle, just the final countdown. Davis asked for water. He prayed. At 28 minutes past 10, guards escorted him to the execution chamber. As he was strapped onto the gurney, the witnesses filed into their viewing rooms. Among them were members of Officer Mark McPhail's family, the man Davis had been convicted of killing in 1989. They sat just feet away from the man who, to them, represented the loss of a father, a brother, a son. But even now, Davis refused to waver. When asked if he had any final words, he turned toward the victim's family and spoke. "I want to talk to the McPhail family. I was not responsible for your son, your father, your brother's death. I am innocent. The incident that happened that night is not my fault. I did not have a gun. I did not shoot your family member. But I'm sorry for your loss. I look to God to help heal your pain." Then, turning to his own family and supporters, he said, "Continue to fight this fight. Keep praying. Keep working. Keep the faith." Then he added, "For those who were about to take his life, may God have mercy on your souls." At 53 minutes past 10, the lethal injection began. 3 drugs pentobarbital, pancuronium bromide, and potassium chloride entered his bloodstream. His breathing slowed, then stopped. By 8 minutes past 11, Troy Anthony Davis was declared dead. Outside, the crowd fell silent. Many wept. Others stood still, stunned. They hadn't just lost a man, they had lost a symbol. Whether one believed Davis was guilty or not, his execution had become a mirror reflecting the moral weight of a justice system that left too many questions unanswered. The story of Troy Davis didn't end that night. It lived on in debates about the death penalty, in law classrooms, in global conversations about justice and doubt. His name would be chanted in protests, worn on shirts, and etched into the hearts of those who believed that even in a system of law, there must still be room for mercy. Because when the state chooses to take a life, the one thing it can never give back is certainty. As the clock struck 8 minutes past 11 on September 21st, 2011, Troy Anthony Davis was gone, yet his story was far from over. What began as a criminal case in Savannah, Georgia, evolved into a global symbol of the complexities and moral weight of capital punishment. For some, his execution marked justice served. For others, it represented the irreversible cost of doubt and systemic failure. His final words were not of rage, but of sorrow and hope. Hope that the truth would still emerge, that others would continue the fight he could no longer carry, whether innocent or guilty. Troy Davis became the face of a broken debate, one where questions linger long after the gurney is wheeled away. If the justice system demands absolute certainty, his case reminds us just how fragile that certainty can be. What do you believe was this justice, or a mistake that can never be undone?